Okay, buckle up. We're going to go quick here, but we're going to go deep fast. We're going to identify three things. What is social conditioning and where did it come from? How does it show up in your life and what you can do about it? What is social conditioning and where does it come from? You will hear people talk about being programmed. You're programmed to do this. Society has programmed you to do that. You know, sort of quasi-paranoid way of looking at things, that there's some out there, omnipotent power that has put you in some kind of matrix and you're stuck. All right, well, you can look at it as complicated as that, but let's just look at it very simple for a second and talk about social conditioning as the process that basically takes place from your earliest childhood memories up until about the time you leave home. Okay, that's the time that you're taught all the fundamentals of what good and bad is. You're taught the more abstract things as morality and stuff like that. Well, good and bad are fundamentally abstract, but not so much with the latter. Sticking your hand into the fire, your body tells you that's hot. That's not a lie. You can't outthink that. So that's a body experience, right? Somebody telling you the fire is hot, well, you don't know that until you try it. So those are the differences between the body and the real experiences you have and the ones that come from others on a very base level. Now, let's take an example of earliest memories as a child, maybe, all right? If you could actually go back and push play on the little tape or whatever of your world, your life, one of the earliest instances where maybe you're laying in the crib and whoever's raising you comes above with a shiny object and it's a bell or something and rings it and says, look, doesn't this sounds great? You smile and giggle. And obviously the way your body feels the lovingness of that space is real, but it's an opinion of the person that's telling you this, that sounds that way. You might not like that sound. It might actually be hurting your ears, but you kind of override it because of the love of the time. But nevertheless, you're taught that the sound of the bell is a nice thing, even though going through life, maybe you fundamentally don't like that for some reason. We'll get to that in a second. But overall, another example would see later on, mom and dad say, hey, look both ways before you cross the street, right? Well, that's some darn good advice right there, because you don't want to walk out to the street and all of a sudden. Now let's look at another way of crossing the street. You walk up to the street, there's three lights there. One's red, one's yellow, one's green. Stop, caution, and go. Now those things are telling you when it's okay to cross the street. And hopefully everybody else is in agreement with that and following that same society agreed upon system, and it's letting you now go. Your freedom of choice and your freedom of thought and all that is absent from here. The only thought you're allowed to have in this instant is remembering what you're socially responsible to do, which is to not, well, if you're driving, not to run through the straight red light. If you're walking, not to walk out now and get hit by a car. So there's some fundamentally good messages in there to avoid catastrophe. But at the same time, absent from that is the human intuition and knowingness of what is good fundamentally right here for me to do and having the choice to do it. Now, let's take it up a notch. Okay, say you grow up in a town where, small town, say it's somewhere, I don't know, I'll use the United States as examples, that's where I grew up. Say it's a town where they don't trust Catholics, or they don't trust black people, or they don't trust white people, or they don't trust whatever, whatever those things are. You may not, in your experience, because of the very homogenous society in which you live, maybe ever even experience interaction with any of these so-called other people that you're not supposed to like or trust. Maybe you do a little bit, maybe it's good or bad, whatever. And so, but largely the vibe there, the feel is that it at least applies the pressure on you that in many instances you're not going to stand up and say, hey, I love Catholics, because it's everybody around you automatically is going to on that. And so you sort of abide by those things. Not that you're giving in, but it's just getting through life and trying not to have a lot of friction. Sometimes it's very simple. It's not like you're caving. It's just that you're wanting to live a stress-free life. And if, maybe not saying something that is against the norm, I'm not going to say right then, especially in those years when you're a child, because then you could be told you're wrong. You could be given detention, a number of things. So basically that is the social conditioning part. Most of it being in the parts that are agreed upon all the people within a society that you live in, these sort of understandings that they have for whatever reason. So what happens next is we'll get into how it shows up in your life, okay? How it shows up in most people's lives is relatively early on, in the first 20 years after they move out of home, say up to 40, 45, somewhere in there, and the way that I look at it is that it's a result of having this sort of pre-programmed society version on certain things. I mean, this doesn't really apply to street lights and stuff like that anymore, but on those other things, such as Catholics or black or white or whatever it might be, Republican, communism, whatever, that maybe you're in your adult life, you've actually experienced some of these things, and let's go radical here and say that you grew up in a town where they didn't like black people, and you ended up with a black partner, and you have a very loving relationship. Well, there's going to be going back home, and that's going to be a little bit of a drag in your life. That's going to create some stress probably. Whether or not you let that make the decision for you depends on how much courage you have to stand up and say, who cares what people think. But even the strongest out there are going to acknowledge that at least it's there, and in that way they're still in that socially conditioned space. And so that's where if those problems are overwhelming for you, maybe it's not as extreme as that and as prevalent as literally, if I show up in my town, this could cause a problem because of the way this person is or whatever. They're usually a lot more abstract. And so our adult experiences don't necessarily jive with what we were conditioned to believe in some of these other socially acceptable ways, such as morals, beliefs, and things like that, not laws all the time. And so that's where you get into this phase of people just, it's like the foundation they're on. There's certain parts are there, certain parts aren't, certain parts totally don't make sense. And it leads to things like what I don't know if they still call it, like a midlife crisis thing, like what the hell is going on in my world? And that's where we have the opportunity, and it doesn't have to come to that. It can never come up. This next part now, how to deal with it, can apply at any point. And so, first and foremost, the number one thing you'd have to do to try to manage the social conditioning would be to identify the belief that is bothering you in some way, that is somehow presenting some kind of amount of chaos in your life. And then do some kind of work, whether it's through mindfulness or any number of approaches to challenge that belief. Be honest with yourself and be honest with receiving the answer that you're given and not use it as an insult. Because if you challenge those beliefs and the answer is not always necessarily right in the way that it feels, you reject it, well then maybe it's part of this other issue I talk about, being addicted to being right. We always want to be right, but apparently there's an issue, so there's something we're not getting right. So challenge even that and sort of get down to the core of it, if you can do that in some way. And these are all parts of letting go, because once you can get down there and to the root of what these beliefs are and challenge them and maybe look at them in a different way, take an alternate perspective, take one that might feel uncomfortable for a second, look at it from that perspective and be like, maybe then it fundamentally changes the way you look at it. And so you don't forget the past, you just sort of now see it in a different way, and you've gained from it, you've gotten something from it. It's a positive experience. And those kind of things will that's part of letting go. You now let go of that old thing, replaced it with this new understanding, and you can probably be free of that as a concern in your life. Now, I know that that's a very, very quick way of looking at a very, very complex thing, but I wanted to share that because I use the word social conditioning a lot in other videos, and I want to be clear on exactly what I mean by that. That it's not necessarily all good and bad, and even good and bad are relative terms at times. That it's what you take from it. It's the learning you get from it, how that enables you to always do what I say the most, make the next best choice. So, now, back to your regularly scheduled programming.